The rain had not stopped for 2 days in the small Irish town of Clonmel. The sky was the color of slate, and the wind carried a kind of sorrow that clung to the church walls like ivy. On the third morning, when the bells of St. Brigid's tolled for early mass, Father Donnelly found something lying near the old cemetery gate, a wicker basket wrapped in a threadbare blanket. Inside, a baby. His cheeks were pale, his tiny hands trembling from the cold, and around his neck hung a tarnished medal of St. Patrick. No note, no name, just the medal and the faint scent of lavender soap. The priest lifted the child and whispered, "God help this little soul." Word of the abandoned baby spread quickly. People came to see him, offering prayers and speculations. Some said the mother must have been a traveler passing through. Others whispered darker things, that the child was cursed, left near the dead for a reason. Father Donnelly named him Eamon, after a saint known for his kindness. The baby was taken to the local orphanage, run by the Sisters of Mercy. The sisters did their best, but life in the orphanage was harsh. The walls were cold, the food plain, and love was something earned, not given. By the time Eamon was 10, he had learned to fight for every scrap of attention. He was bright, curious, and stubbornly hopeful. He spent hours gazing at the church cemetery from his dormitory window, wondering if someone would ever come for him. No one did. Years passed, and Eamon grew into a quiet young man. He had a gift for working with his hands, fixing broken chairs, carving wooden crosses, restoring old icons. That talent eventually led him to become a restorer of historic churches across Ireland. But no matter how far he traveled, he never stopped dreaming about that night, the rain, the church, and the invisible mother who had left him behind. One autumn evening, while repairing the cracked stone of an abandoned chapel in County Kerry, Eamon noticed something strange. Beneath a patch of moss on an old tombstone, faint letters appeared as he brushed away the dirt. Eamon, beloved son. The air seemed to shift. His name, his exact name, carved into a grave that looked decades old. His hands trembled as he traced the letters. The wind carried a faint whisper, like someone sighing his name from beyond. Was it a coincidence? Or had he just stumbled upon a piece of the story he had been searching for his whole life? He didn't know yet, but that discovery would unravel everything he thought he knew about himself. If you were Eamon, would you have the courage to dig into the past, or let it rest with the dead? Comment below what you would do. The night after he found the inscription, Eamon couldn't sleep. The wind coming off the Atlantic pressed against the chapel like a living thing, sighing under doors and through the bell tower's cracked louvers. He lay awake in the sacristy, where he'd unrolled his sleeping bag, replaying the letters over and over in his mind. Eamon, beloved son. It felt less like a name and more like a thread tugging at a knot he'd carried his whole life. At first light, he returned to the graveyard with a soft brush, a mason's pick, and a bottle of water. He worked with the patience of a restorer, not a mourner, gentle, methodical. The stone was worn, its edges sugared by time. As he cleared lichen from the epitaph, more words rose out of the gray. Eamon, beloved son. 28 March 1997. Rest in God's quiet. His stomach tightened. 28 years. His age. He checked the birth date against the one the orphanage had told him. It matched. Coincidence felt suddenly smaller. A shallow oval near the top caught his eye, the ghost of a missing oval portrait. Beneath it, a tiny cross and, almost invisible, two initials carved close to the base. MD. The letters were so fine, they could have been a mason's mark, or a signature. He knelt there until his knees ached, whispering the letters under his breath like a prayer. MD. By mid-morning, he was at the rectory next door, warming his hands around a chipped mug of tea. The parish secretary, Mrs. O'Shea, a woman with a neat bun and sharp eyes, frowned at his request for burial records. "Some of the old registers went to the diocesan archive in Tralee," she said. "What's your interest in that grave?" "I restore what's broken," Eamon answered, not quite lying. "Stones, sometimes stories." She studied him a beat longer than comfort allowed, then slid a small ledger across the table. "You're lucky that one remained." She pointed to a line dated April 2nd, 1997. Infant Eamon, no family present. Buried at parish expense. Next to it, a note in different handwriting. Woman at gate left flowers. No name given. Mrs. O'Shea tapped the margin. Father Kearney wrote that. He died in 2008. Said the woman came at dusk. What kind of flowers? Lilacs, she said. And lavender once, the strong kind you smell even in the rain. Eamon felt the old orphanage smell rise up from memory. Clean, bitter, like the day he was found. He thanked her and walked out into the pale sunlight, pulse loud in his ears. The world seemed to lean in. At the county library in Tralee, he fed coins into a microfilm machine and scrolled through brittle newspapers from the spring of 1997. Births, deaths, auctions, a missing dog. Then a small notice in the Kerry Herald. Foundling discovered near St. Brigid's Cemetery, Clonmel. Authorities request information. The description of the basket, the blanket, the medal of St. Patrick. He reached for the chain at his neck, the medal he'd worn since childhood, tarnished like an old coin. He had never thought to look closely. In the library's harsh light, he turned it over. Along the rim, beneath decades of wear, he spotted it, almost invisible. MD not stamped by the saint's maker, not in a factory font. Scratched by a hand that pressed too hard as if the act hurt. The same initials as the stone. He left the library with his lungs burning and took the bus east to Clonmel. The orphanage on O'Connell Road had become a community center, but the old bell still hung over the door. Sister Agnes, retired and spectral, opened to him with a smile that had once kept boys in line. You were a serious child, she said, tilting her head. And a careful one. Come in, Eamon. He told her about the stone, about the initials, about the notice in the paper. Her eyes clouded with something like weather gathering over a hill. There was a woman, Sister Agnes said finally. I never saw her face clearly. She kept to the hedges, but I know the smell you speak of. Lavender. She came on the last Friday of the month for years, left lilacs by the gate when they were in season. Once, when I locked up late, I found a little tin of butter biscuits with a note that only said Muddy for the boy. I threw them out. We had rules. Did she ever speak? Once, the nun whispered. She stood just outside the lamplight and asked, Does he still have the medal? I said yes, and she put her hand to her mouth. She shook as if cold. Then she walked away. Eamon pressed his palms together to keep from reaching for the medal. Do you remember anything else? Sister Agnes stared past him, a name on her lips when she bowed her head. Mare, pronounced softly, like Mao Ra. I don't know if it was hers or a prayer. He wrote it down, Mare, Mora, M.D. The letters began to make a shape. That evening, he stopped at a small pub called Molly's Harp, where old men still argued soccer, and the bartender, Aisling, had an ear for stories. He told her about the grave, about the ledger note, about the lilacs. My granddad was sexton up that way in the late 90s, she said, polishing a glass. Name's Padraig Keane. Still lives over the shop. He used to say there was a girl who cried at the wall by St. Brigid's. Broke his heart that it did. Eamon found the man in a narrow house that smelled of turf smoke and old books. Padraig's hands were knotted from years of spade work. His eyes were as clear as rain. She came at dusk, Padraig said without prompting, as if the years had been a pause mid-sentence. Never crossed the gate, kept to the wall, fingers on the stone like she was praying into it. Once, I asked if she needed a priest. She said, I already have one. He just won't forgive me. Did you learn her name? Not then. He turned to a drawer, rummaged, and brought out a folded scrap of paper, yellowed with time. Found this tucked in the mortar near the cemetery steps the spring after. Thought it was a child's scribble. I kept it because some things you keep. He handed it over. Eamon unfolded it with careful fingers. There in hurried ink, a single line throbbed on the page. Letters slanting as if written while standing. Forgive me, Ma. The last letter broke into a blot, as if the pen had been snatched away. Beneath it, faintly penciled, a name that made his mouth go dry. Donnelly. The paper shook in his hands. Donnelly. The name of the priest who had found him, who had given him his first blessing and his only name. Priest. Donnelly. M.D. What would you do? Eamon asked, voice thin. If the forgiveness you needed belonged to someone who wore a collar? Padraig's eyes flicked to the metal at Eamon's throat. I'd start by asking why the dead are speaking now. Eamon folded the note with reverence and slipped it into his wallet. Somewhere, a hinge inside him loosened. In the distance, a bell struck the hour. He stood to leave, the road dark and long, the wind fresh with rain. As he stepped outside, his phone vibrated. An unknown number, a local exchange from Clonmel. He nearly let it go to voicemail, then answered. A woman's voice, older but steady, breathed his name as if tasting a miracle. Eamon? He swallowed. Yes. Meet me by St. Bridget's Wall tomorrow at dusk, she said. Bring the metal. The line went dead, and then the wind changed. The next evening, the sun dipped behind the hills like a dying ember, washing the sky in violet and gold. Eamon walked the long, narrow road toward St. Bridget's Church, his heart pounding with every step. The metal around his neck felt heavier than it ever had before, as if it too was waiting for the truth. The graveyard was silent when he arrived. The iron gate creaked, echoing through the still air. Mist clung to the grass, and the smell of wet earth mixed with something faintly floral, lilacs. He could see the grave now, the one that bore his name, the one that had whispered his past. A figure stood beside it, an elderly woman, her silver hair tied in a loose braid wrapped in a dark shawl. She didn't turn immediately, but Eamon could tell she was trembling. When she finally faced him, her eyes, pale green, like the sea on a cloudy day, widened in recognition. You came, she said softly. Eamon nodded, his voice caught somewhere between disbelief and fear. Who are you? She looked down at the ground, as though searching for courage among the roots. My name is Mayor Donnelly. His breath hitched. The initials, the letters carved into the tombstone, the metal, everything aligned like falling dominoes. Donnelly? He whispered. Like Father Donnelly? Her lips quivered. He was my father. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Only the wind moved between them, rustling the trees like a sigh from the past. She gestured toward the tombstone. His tombstone. I came here every year, she said. For 28 years I've stood by this grave, praying that one day I'd find the courage to face what I did. Eamon's voice was trembling now. What did you do? Tears gathered in her eyes. I left you. The words hit him harder than he expected. He had always imagined this moment, had dreamed of hearing it. But the reality was heavier, rawer, more human. She reached for the metal around his neck. I gave you this before I left you there, she said. It was the only thing I could leave behind. My father wanted to send you away quietly to hide the shame. I was 19, unmarried, and pregnant with his child. Eamon's entire body froze. His child? Mare nodded slowly, her tears falling freely now. Father Donnelly was not just the man who found you. He was your father. The air seemed to vanish. The church bells began to toll in the distance, the same bells that had rung the morning he was found. Every sound, every breath felt distorted, unreal. Eamon took a step back. No, that's not possible. He was a good man once, she said, clutching her shawl tight. But the church broke him. When he learned I was carrying his child, he begged me to hide it. He said God would never forgive us. When you were born, he told me to let him handle it. Said he'd find a way to keep us both safe. But when I woke that night and you were gone, I knew what he'd done. Eamon felt sick. He left me there? He told everyone he found you by chance, Mare whispered. But it was all to protect his name, his priesthood. I tried to take my own life that winter, but every spring I came back here, to be close to you. Her hand touched his cheek, trembling but gentle. You were never a sin, Eamon. You were the only good thing I ever did. He didn't know whether to scream or weep. Instead, he just stood there, torn between fury and grief. Why didn't you tell anyone? Why now? Because I thought you were dead. The word struck him cold. She pointed to the tombstone. That grave, it isn't yours. It's empty. Your father carved it himself before he died. He said it was for a child who never lived. But I think—" her voice cracked. "I think it was his way of confessing." Eamon knelt beside the grave, brushing the grass aside again. The inscription shimmered in the fading light, suddenly different, almost sorrowful. "Eamon, beloved son." Mare knelt beside him, her voice barely a whisper. "I came to forgive him, but now maybe it's you who must forgive me." For the first time in his life, Eamon didn't feel alone. He felt connected to the pain, to the story, to something bigger than himself. The wind picked up, swirling through the cemetery, and the church bell rang one final time before falling silent. He turned to her. "You don't have to come here anymore," he said softly. "You don't have to hide in the shadows." She smiled faintly through her tears. "I don't think I will, my love." The next moment, a sound, faint, metallic, echoed from beneath the tombstone. Eamon froze. It wasn't the wind. Something beneath the stone had shifted. He exchanged a glance with Meyer. She looked frightened, but she nodded. "Whatever's down there," she whispered, "it's meant for you to find." Eamon reached for his tools. The truth wasn't finished yet. The air around the graveyard seemed to hold its breath as Eamon knelt, brushing aside the damp earth. The rain had stopped hours earlier, but the soil was soft, dark, and alive with the smell of history. Mare stood a few steps behind him, her shawl drawn tight, eyes glistening with a strange mix of fear and relief. "Be careful," she whispered. Eamon slid his mason's chisel into the crack at the base of the stone. With a few careful taps, the slab loosened, tilting slightly forward. A hollow sound followed, not the dull thud of solid ground, but the echo of something concealed. He cleared more dirt, his hands trembling. Beneath the tombstone, wrapped in a layer of decayed linen, was a small wooden box, no bigger than a loaf of bread, its surface stained by time. Mare gasped softly. "He told me he burned everything," she murmured. "Every letter, every photograph, everything that proved we ever—" Her voice broke. Eamon pulled the box free. It was sealed with wax, the faint outline of a cross pressed into it. He hesitated, then pried it open. Inside, a folded piece of parchment rested on top of a stack of yellowed papers and an envelope addressed in delicate handwriting. "For Eamon, when he is found." He unfolded the letter first. The writing was steady, firm, and painfully familiar. "My dearest son, if you are reading this, then my sins have finally spoken louder than my silence. I was both your father and your betrayer. I convinced myself that abandoning you was salvation, that by erasing my name from your life I could erase my guilt before God. But I have learned that God is not fooled by lies, even the ones we tell ourselves in His name. Every night since that storm, I have dreamed of you. The cry I silenced, the blanket I left behind. Your mother, Mare, begged me to bring you home. I refused, fearing punishment, not realizing the punishment was already inside me. I carved this stone for you when the church demanded I bury my sin. I left a place here for your memory, not your body. If you ever return, know this. You were loved, more deeply than my faith allowed me to admit. Father Patrick Donnelly." The letter slipped from Eamon's hands. He felt the world tilt, the weight of every unanswered question pressing down like the Irish sky itself. Mare knelt beside him, covering her mouth with her hand. "He wrote that before he died," she whispered. "He never told me, never told anyone." There were other papers in the box. Birth records, baptismal certificates, even a faded photograph. Eamon turned it over gently. It showed a young priest standing beside a smiling woman holding a baby wrapped in a blanket. The metal around the baby's neck glinted even in the faded image. Eamon traced his own face in the photo, almost unbelieving. "He kept this?" Mare nodded, tears spilling freely now. "He couldn't let you go, even when he tried to." The wind picked up, sweeping through the cemetery, rattling the old iron gate. Somewhere above, a raven croaked from the church steeple. Eamon sat back, his heart pounding, his mind caught between rage and something softer, an aching understanding. "He took everything from us," he said quietly. But maybe this was his way of giving it back. Mare placed her hand over his. He was a coward, she said gently, but he was also a man, and men break under the weight of the secrets they're told to carry. Eamon looked toward the church. The old stained glass windows glowed faintly from the candles flickering inside. For the first time, he didn't see a place of holiness. He saw walls built to contain shame, a silence dressed in ritual. Maybe it's time someone told the truth, he said. Mare's eyes widened. You can't mean... I do, he interrupted. If this church buried the truth, then I'll uncover it. Stone by stone, name by name. She hesitated, fear flashing across her face. They'll call it blasphemy. He smiled faintly. Then let them. They buried the box again that night, not to hide it, but to keep it safe. Eamon carved a single word into the underside of the tombstone before sealing it back. Forgiven. As they stood, the sky broke open again, a soft rain falling like baptism. Mare turned to him. What will you do now? I'll finish restoring this church, he said, and then I'll start restoring our name. She smiled weakly. And after that? He looked at her, truly looked, and for the first time he saw not the shadow of the past, but the fragile beauty of survival. After that, I'll come back here every spring with lilacs. She nodded, tears shining in her eyes. Then I'll bring the lavender. The two of them stood in silence as the rain washed over the gravestones, the sound of it like quiet applause from the earth itself. But as Eamon turned to leave, he caught something glinting in the grass. A small key, old and rusted, shaped like a cross. It must have fallen from the box. He picked it up, frowning. There was an inscription along its spine. Rectory Archive, East Wing. He looked back toward the dark silhouette of the church. Whatever secrets his father had tried to bury, they weren't all gone yet. The next morning, mist clung low over Clonmel like a curtain drawn by ghosts. Eamon walked alone toward St. Bridget's, the small key heavy in his pocket. Mare had stayed behind in the cottage, promising to meet him later. Don't go alone, she'd said, but Eamon knew he had to. Some truths were meant to be faced in solitude. The church door groaned open. Dust motes danced in the thin light slanting through the stained glass, coloring the pews in fractured reds and blues. He could almost hear the echoes of Father Donnelly's voice, a voice that had once prayed over his crib, that had blessed him without ever admitting why. Behind the altar, a narrow staircase spiraled downward into the old rectory. Few knew it existed anymore. It had been sealed after a flood years ago. The key fit perfectly into the corroded lock. With a soft click, the door opened to reveal a passage lined with shelves of decaying parish records, the smell of mold and parchment thick in the air. He lit a small lantern. Files lay scattered across the table. Baptism logs, confessional notes, letters bound by string. One folder marked Private PD caught his eye. Inside were pages of Father Donnelly's handwriting. Not sermons, but confessions. Lines written in a trembling hand. I have sinned not against God, but against innocence itself. I buried my truth behind stone and scripture. I hear the child's cry in the rain. I pray that one day he will find his way back and forgive me, for I could not forgive myself. Eamon's throat tightened. He turned the page. A second document, older, was a letter addressed to the diocesan council. It revealed how Donnelly had confessed his moral failing years after the event, how the church had quietly reassigned him to a remote parish to avoid scandal. They had known everything. He sank into a chair, the lantern flickering beside him. The silence roared. He thought of the years he'd spent wondering who he was, believing himself unworthy, broken, all because of one man's fear, and an institution's silence. For a moment, he wanted to destroy it all, to burn the papers, to erase the shame from history. But then he remembered Mare's trembling smile, the way her voice had steadied when she said, "Forgive him." Forgiveness wasn't about protecting the guilty. It was about freeing the living. He gathered the papers carefully, slid them into a leather folio, and locked the archive behind him. When he emerged from the staircase, the light had changed. The morning fog had thinned and sunlight now streamed through the stained glass like a quiet benediction. Outside, Mare waited by the cemetery wall. Her eyes searched his face as he approached. "Did you find what he left?" He nodded. "Everything, and everyone who helped him hide it." She looked frightened. "What will you do with it?" Eamon hesitated. "Tell the truth. Not for revenge, but for peace. For us." She reached for his hand, gripping it tightly. "Then I'll stand with you." Later that afternoon, the two of them stood before the parish council, their voices steady, their story unwavering. The revelation spread through the town like ripples in a still pond. Not scandalous, but solemn. People left lilacs at the church gate, some in sorrow, others in solidarity. The church did not fall. Its walls remained. But for the first time in decades, they seemed honest, cracked, human, and filled with light. Weeks passed. Eamon returned to his work, restoring churches not to preserve their perfection, but to honor their flaws. He began carving again, not crosses, but small hands joined in forgiveness. Each piece sold quietly, finding its way to those who needed it most. On the first spring morning of the following year, he came back to St. Bridget's. The air was warm, the grass alive with dew. He carried lilacs. Mare brought lavender. Together they laid the flowers by the grave that bore his name. The tombstone no longer felt like a lie. It felt like a doorway. As they stood there, the wind stirred again, gentle, familiar, brushing the petals across the earth. Eamon could almost hear his father's voice, faint and fragile, carried on the breeze. "My beloved son." He closed his eyes and whispered back, "Rest now." For the first time, the silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was peace. Some stories aren't about uncovering secrets, they're about transforming them. Forgiveness doesn't change the past, but it changes the power the past holds over us. If this story touched you, share it with someone who believes in second chances. Leave a comment. What does forgiveness mean to you?